Why did I write this book? I wrote this book for the following reason. I got really, really pissed off with people with lots of money telling people who don't have any money they need to pay shit back. That's basically it. I grew up on the butt end of the British welfare state. I'm an orphan, and I was raised by my paternal grandmother. So I am the greatest living example of intergenerational social mobility you're ever going to see, because I'm a freaking Ivy League professor. So I went from there to there. How did I do that? Because of this thing that gets blamed called the welfare state. That bloated, paternalist, out of control, incentivizing, demotivating piece of crap called the welfare state. Now, why is this a completely bullshit story? Back in 2000, the number one concern of financial markets globally was there wasn't going to be enough federal debt, because we'd balance the budget. And seriously, the number one concern is there wouldn't be enough T-bills, right? So, fast forward 13 years, right, we're all freaking out. Now, in between, a couple of interesting things happened. So you have a balanced budget, which basically means over time as the economy grows, your debt stock's going to shrink, and that's why people had a problem with it. So you're going through a rapid period of growth. This is the tech boom period, all this sort of stuff. And then there's 9/11. So there's a little dip in the economy, and a guy called Greenspan comes along and says, let's cut interest rates and essentially do asset protection for everybody who's bought assets by giving them more or less free money. So then we decide on top of that we're going to have 2 tax cuts. Why? Because we just need more money. Screw it. We're just going to do it. We'll have some tax cuts. No corresponding way of paying it off or whatever. We'll just take the tax cuts. And then we'll decide to fight 2 wars of choice for dubious political reasons without raising any taxes. That'll be a good one. So by the time you get to 2006, there's 61% debt to GDP already. I don't remember anybody in Congress, particularly Republicans, jumping up and down about the crazy level of federal debt in 2006. And then in 2007, 2008, there's a run on the repo markets. Basically, the hidden story of the financial crisis that nobody really talks about is actually quite simple, is that because there was a shortage of T-bills, because in fact many of them were in China, because they keep buying a lot of them, we started to use AAA mortgage products as collateral for short-term financial deals in the repo markets. As the housing crisis happened, those bonds that made up those instruments fell from AAA to B to C. At that time, that meant that if you were a heavily leveraged financial organization, a Bear Stearns, for example, and you were using these things as pledges and as repo collateral, as they fell value, you had to use more and more of them to borrow the same amount of money. Unfortunately, you couldn't do that because there's a fixed stock of the assets and they're hugely levered. This meant a 3% return against their asset base rendered them effectively insolvent. Once everybody figured this out, you shout fire in the crowded theatre, everybody freaks out, heads for the exits, you get a liquidity crunch, you get into a financial crisis. We decided to bail out the system rather than let it fail because it was too big to fail. The costs of doing so were basically a 30% drop in tax revenue across the OECD countries because the financial sector becomes so big, particularly in the United States and the United Kingdom, that it was generating huge amounts of taxes. At the same time, the economy slows down as the liquidity crunch hits the real economy and affects lending and borrowing and spending. Consumer expenditures trend down as the consumer expectations, as the investment expectations. You get caught in a slump. Once you get caught in a slump, automatic transfers in the economy mean that benefits go up at the same time as tax revenues go down. So you're going to have a bigger deficit. As you have a bigger deficit, you multiply that over time, you issue more debt, you go from 61% to 100% debt to GDP. That's why we're here. There was no orgy of public spending. It's a lie. I take Amtrak every day. I would have noticed an orgy of public spending. If there was an orgy on public spending, it was on asset protection and income protection for the people who had made out with the most for the past 30 years, when we bailed out those assets. That's actually what happened. Now here's the inequity of the put in this whole thing. Why is it that Social Security, which isn't even part of federal budget calculations on the deficit, which by the way has a $2.3 trillion surplus, that has to be cut so we can pay back the debt accrued by bailing out some of the richest people in our society and ensuring their assets? Does anybody else think that's total horseshit? Because I really do. And that's why I wrote this book. Europe has been cutting like there's no tomorrow. They've got the leeches on the corpse and they're opening up the veins. Greece has lost 30% of GDP in 4 years. So the question is the following. Why is it that Europe, particularly the European Union, suddenly became this huge doomsday device for this enormous experiment on austerity, which so far has cost around 30% of GDP in the periphery and has generated 25 million extra unemployed in comparison to the United States? The German army didn't manage that between 41 and 45. That's how much damage has been done by this. Seems like something to investigate.